Oxford American, National Park Service, and Jazz St. Louis present Recognition Before Reconciliation, a civil rights panel discussion live at Gateway Arch National Park in St. Louis, Missouri. With support from Jefferson National Parks Association, Stella Boyle Smith Trust, and Gateway Arch Park Foundation. Follow us on social media at Oxford American.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeremy Sweat, Superintendent at Gateway Arch National Park, and it's my honor to welcome all of you to Recognition Before Reconciliation, a panel discussion which is part of No Tears St. Louis, a multi-day residency that uses music and conversation to engage communities in civil rights, education, and storytelling. No Tears originated in 2016 when Oxford American commissioned a musical composition honoring civil rights heroes, the Little Rock Nine. Since then, they've partnered with local presenters and artists on residencies like this one, building on the original work to engage host communities about their own civil rights history. We are fortunate to have this project here in St. Louis. I'd like to thank Oxford American, tonight's moderator, speakers, and panelists. I'd also like to thank several organizations who provided financial support for this project. So please join me in thanking Jefferson National Parks Association, Gateway Arch Park Foundation, and the Stella Boyle Smith Trust. And lastly, I'd like to give a big thanks to members of my staff from Gateway Arch National Park who helped to make this possible. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ryan Harris of Oxford American.
Yeah, we can clap for that. What excellent diction. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Well, as he said, my name is Ryan Harris. I'm really humbled to be here. I want to reiterate my deep appreciation to the folks that underwrote this program. Again, Jefferson National Parks Association, David Grove sitting over there, thank you so much. Gateway Arch Park Foundation, Stella Boyle Smith Trust, and the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, who also stepped up in a big way to help on the promotional efforts of this. I'll just briefly say we've been doing the No Tears Project in cities around the country for 7 years, and I believe St. Louis is the 5th or 6th city that we're doing it in. And at its core, No Tears is really about recognition. It's about recognition of the bravery of people like these sitting on stage right here. It's about recognition that the truth in history is sometimes challenging to hear, but nonetheless is the truth. And we hope through tonight's program, recognition that fundamentally we have shared humanity and we're not as different from each other as we might all imagine. So I want to turn things over now to, thank you so much for being here, for making time, and I want to turn things over to Robin White, standing next to me, who is, I call her the Yaya of the No Tears Project. She currently serves as the superintendent of Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site. And what's been a 3-decade career with the National Park Service that's often seen her serving in roles to protect sites and interpret stories in many of America's, many places in America that fundamentally protect the American Civil Rights Movement. So Robin, she's going to provide an invocation of sorts, so I don't know why that's funny.
Here we go. Okay. In the name of freedom, thank you all for providing us an opportunity to share our narratives with you and for giving us your time. I would like for you to just take a moment and walk with me as we commemorate agents of change in the name of freedom. Gotta get my glasses right. It is easy to be disconnected from our past because it has been often lost, distorted, or destroyed. But still, we must never forget those brave individuals that challenge the system of legislated subjugation. The individuals such as Dred Scott, whose battle for freedom was pursued in the courthouse, Erie, in St. Louis. In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court decision denied citizenship to Dred Scott. This impacted all of African descendants. This impacted an old group of people. Years later, the banner of Plessy and Ferguson also was fought on the battlefield in the courtroom. And the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1896 yielded a separate but equal doctrine that was based on transportation. And that doctrine stated that separate facilities for blacks and whites were constitutional, as long as they were equal. And although the decision was based on transportation, most states weaponized that paradox to deny a group of people their fundamental human rights, thus the birth of Jim Crow. Later, a strategic plan was put into place, an all-out assault on segregation by a team of lawyers. And the outcome of that was the May 17, 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education. Well, because they stated that it was unconstitutional, that doesn't mean the battle that ended. So consequently, individuals across the country, standing in their convictions, volunteered to desegregate schools. The Little Rock Nine, Ruby Bridges, the McDonald Tree, the Memphis 13, and we can go on and on. This is just to name a few. Brokers of freedom presented the true meaning of living history with unwavering dignity. So yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they stand as our symbols of hope in the name of freedom. One of our greatest strengths is being comfortable with who we are, with you being comfortable with who you are, to empower others. We must truly be aware of our shared past and painful past before we can move towards a progressive and substantial healing. We must be aware of that. We must recognize that. We must own that. We cannot reconcile without owning our past. Once again, where there are spiritual violations under the rule of social oppression, self-advocacy for freedom will rise. Recognize, recognize, recognize. The movement began within you. The movement began within me. Our ownership to make civil wrongs civil rights. So I encourage you to always stand in your convictions, to walk in grace and beauty on the journey of reconciliation. Thank you. Here you go.
My pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening, Carol Daniel. A news anchor and journalist with over 40 years in broadcasting, Carol has received numerous honors. Just to name a few, she's been twice honored by the National Newspapers Association in the humor category for her column in the St. Louis American newspaper. She was a 2019 St. Louis Press Club Media Person of the Year. In 2021, she was named a living legend by the Greater St. Louis Association of Black Journalists. And in 2022, she was inducted into the Media Hall of Fame by St. Louis Media History Foundation. She's also the current president of the Association of Black Journalists. And I will now turn it over to Carol to introduce this evening's panel. Before I do that, though, just a reminder, we are recording this to be streamed online, so please make sure your cell phones are silent. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carol. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. As we like to say, give yourselves a round of applause for parking wherever you parked and making it here. We had a long conversation about parking. Yes, we did. Thank you so much for being here. This is such an important discussion, and we're so glad that it is being recorded so people can watch this in the future who aren't with us this evening. I do want to introduce the panelists. They are esteemed and history makers, each and every one of them. Our first panelist is Lynne M. Jackson on the far end. Lynne is the great-great-granddaughter of Dred and Harriet Scott, two brave slaves, as you well know, who sued for their freedom before the United States Supreme Court in the landmark Dred Scott versus Sanford case of 1857. Ms. Jackson is the founder and executive director of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, and among other achievements was instrumental in raising money to commission and install the first statue of Dred and Harriet, which stands outside the old courthouse here in St. Louis, Missouri. She's been an active leader in St. Louis's civic and philanthropic community for decades, with organizations as diverse as Community Women Action Against Hardship, Black Women's Entrepreneurial Network, and the St. Louis Artists Guild. Please welcome Lynne M. Jackson.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Percy Green II. Percy is a social worker and Black activist here in St. Louis, Missouri. He was active in the St. Louis chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, and was a founding member of ACTION, or Action Committee, to improve opportunities for Negroes. Green was also the plaintiff in the landmark civil rights case McDonnell Douglas Corporation versus Green, which helped define the burden of proof standards in employment discrimination disputes. He was involved in unmasking the veiled prophet in 1972 in protest of St. Louis's veiled prophet ball's exclusion of Jewish and Black people. He is perhaps most well known for scaling the Gateway Arch in 1964 to protest the exclusion of Blacks from federal contracts and construction jobs related to the building of the arch. Green has fought for equality and Black inclusion in the St. Louis region for more than half a century. He is a member of the Peace Economy Project's board. Percy Green II. And our last panelist this evening is Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, a group of African-American students who in 1957 were the first Black students ever to attend classes at the previously all-white Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Among other honors, she's been the recipient of the Springer Medal by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, as well as the Congressional Gold Medal awarded by President Bill Clinton, the nation's highest civilian award. She is the author of the 2018 autobiography, The Worst First Day, Bullied While Desegregating Little Rock Central High. Elizabeth Eckford. I have been so nervous and excited for this conversation because it's so impactful, and I hope we all walk away learning something and even inspired, definitely inspired. Elizabeth, can I start with you? Yes. What did your parents say to you either the night before or that day that you were going to integrate that high school?
I remember that my mother was nervous. My father was nervous. My father worked a split shift, so he he ordinarily would have been asleep when I was leaving to go to school in the morning. But he was awake, and he was walking around smoking a cigar and smoking a pipe too. I don't think he was aware that he was doing both. My mother told somebody in the living room to turn the TV off because the news was upsetting her. We didn't expect any violence, even though the governor said that he called out the all-white Arkansas National Guard because he expected violence. He said that if we showed up, blood would run in the streets. I didn't believe him. I thought that I was anxious to be able to find my classes in such a large school. I'd never gone to a school that large before. Central High is 2 blocks wide. Its grounds are 2 blocks deep. It's the largest high school in the county. I had asked my mother during spring 1957 if I could go to Central. I'm very comfortable in calling my mother the Queen of No, now that she has passed on. But it's an accurate description of her. My mother was overly protective. The girls particularly practically couldn't go anywhere except to visit my grandfather's store, to go to school, and go to church, and not much else. So when I asked her if I could go to Central, this time she didn't say no. She said, "We'll see." But "we'll see" prevailed throughout the spring and well into the summer, to the point where the superintendent said that he would make the final selection. And when he found out that a large number of Negro students had signed up to go to Central, he said that that was too many because the district had planned a limited token desegregation of Central High. They felt if they had just a handful of black students there, the courts would consider that desegregation. And I always use the term desegregation rather than integration because of our experiences there. I remember that Mother and I prayed, and she cited the 91st Psalm. It's a psalm asking for protection, very similar to the 93rd Psalm that many people know. I remember that I got my lunch money from my dad. If my older sister hadn't gone into his pocket or his wallet to get the lunch money, my older sister was a doer in our family, among the children. Our parents were very, very strict. I described them as benevolent oligarchs, and we were the loyal subjects. If my father hadn't been awake, I would have asked my sister to get my lunch money, because I was a very, very shy child. I was a submissive child. I had asked repeatedly to go to Central because this was extremely important to me. It was important because I knew that my parents could not afford to send both me and my older sister to college. I knew that I needed scholarships in order to go to college. My grandfather had said things like, "Elizabeth, when you go to college," as though this was going to happen, and I believed him. But I wanted to go to Central because I knew that during the time of segregation, that there was no equality of what was available to us. That Central had more courses, a more diverse curriculum. They had more laboratories, because I remember at Dunbar, which had been built 2 years after Central, that there would be 4 students standing around waiting for a chance to look through the microscope. Whereas at Central, there were many, many laboratories. So I wanted to go to Central so I would be better prepared for college, So I knew I had to have scholarships in order to go to college. And I had been brought up with the understanding that you had to have additional training or education in order to have more choices in your life. This was very, very important to me. Finally, when the names of those students were published in the newspaper, my parents agreed that we would go and have an interview with the superintendent of schools for Little Rock, since he was the one making the decision. And I think that I was the last one chosen. We are called the Little Rock Nine. That probably comes from a newspaper headline, but I didn't know all of them, even though we had all gone to segregated schools. Central was built in 1927 at a cost of $1.5 million. Dunbar was built in 1929, and the district did not have enough money to finish it. Dunbar was built with funds from Julius Rosenwald, a Sears Company executive, who had built schoolhouses throughout the South so that we would have a place to go to school. The majority of them were wooden schoolhouses. Dunbar, which still exists today, is one of 5 brick-and-mortar Julius Rosenwald schools. Another thing that was different about it, the district planned for my parents to learn how to work in laundries for vocational education. But the Negroes in Little Rock demanded more. So Dunbar had a curriculum similar to Tuskegee Institute, where the boys could learn auto mechanics, bricklaying, carpentry, plumbing, and printing, and the girls could learn typing. But it gave us many more options, because if one was not a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher, you didn't have any other choices available other than the lowest paying, low skill, servile jobs. Not everybody, even if in a factory, the only place that one of us would be employed would be the janitor. We would not have been able to work in department stores, in banks, at the drugstore. There was just so much that was closed to our people. Dunbar meant so much to people in Arkansas that teenagers came to Little Rock in order to get the best high school education that was available to them throughout the state. I know a lot of people who did that, but that meant they had to come and find a place to live and pay for that. They had to have a job in order to get a high school education. Dunbar now is a middle school, but there's still people in Little Rock who care enough that it cannot be torn down.
We are going to talk about the famous photo that a lot of you may remember. It is of Elizabeth with her shades on and her white short sleeve blouse and her white skirt, clutching her books, and people, white women is most in the crowd that I see in this one photo, yelling. We're going to talk about that in a second. I want to bring you in here now, Percy, and I've always known you as the person who climbed the arch. When did you decide that you were going to climb the arch? And had there been, I'm not aware of the answer to this at all, but had there been prior discussions about getting more black people into jobs to help construct the arch, and you were told no, and you decided to then, I'll stop this work?
No, this was excuse me. This was an organized effort. I am a disciple of the Jefferson Bank protest that took place in 1963, August the 30th of 1963. And after that effort, during this particular effort, may I say, I was appointed as the employment chairperson the Jefferson Bank effort was only asking for 4 jobs. Jefferson Bank was considered as an all-black bank when it was located there on Jefferson and Franklin. And it decided to relocate. And it relocated in the predominantly white commercial area at Jefferson and Washington. And the few blacks that they had in the menial position, janitorial, they disappeared. And so the Jefferson, East St. Louis had an action going on, a protest action around the banks, and it was resolved in about 3 to 6 weeks. So that gave the organization core the idea of saying, well, let's check on Jefferson Bank, being that it was considered as a black bank, even though the owners were white. But it was located in the black community for over 22 years prior to them moving. And at which time they discovered that there were no blacks, and some demands were made on them to hire 4 blacks. They refused and got an injunction, and there was a lot of razzle-dazzle whereby 19 people were held in contempt, black and whites, former members of CORE that went to jail. Well, during that process, as I said before, the protest started August the 30th of 1963, and we terminated the action at the Jefferson Bank January of 1964. But during that particular interim, I was appointed to be the chairperson of the employment committee. During that particular period, we were deciding what would we do after the Jefferson Bank situation. We wanted to home in on employment, decent employment, better paying employment for blacks, and so we homed in on the Arch. It was under construction, and it was at below ground level, I think, at the time that we first started looking at it. And then, of course, we thought that the first strategy that we would undergo was to engage in some negotiations. The name of this particular company, the general contractor, was named McDonald. General Contracting Company. They were the builders of the Arch. And so we asked him why weren't there any black contractors or black employees? He felt as if he told us that he couldn't find any. Well, that didn't go over well with us, and we were looking for a fight anyway, And so we brought that back to the group, and of course, we decided that we'll work up the strategy to engage some protest demonstrations. At that time, this area here was all flattened, nothing here, but during that particular time, prior to us actually carrying on the activity at the Arch, we had a problem within the organization. The organization decided that they didn't want to engage in any more civil disobedience, protest demonstrations. And of course, the people that on my side of the aisle, we felt as if that was the most effective protest, is to engage in civil disobedience. So we had a division within the group. However, we kept it under wraps. On July the 14th of 1964, Richard Daly and I, who was a white student at the time, we decided that that perhaps a demonstration that could focus on the racial discrimination there at the Arch would be if someone would climb it. But first of all, we had to determine whether we could get close enough to do that. And we did a little observation, a dry run, and about a week or so prior to the actual climbing, to see whether or not that we could do that. We walked, he and I both, at lunchtime, went up to the arch to touch it while the workers were working. The workers were at lunch. We decided that the best chance of us being able to execute the climbing would be at lunchtime, when most of the workers were in a relaxed state. And sure enough, we walked right up, touched it, walked right out. We went back to the group and said that we think that we could carry on the climbing of the arch. And so about a couple of weeks later, of course, I had a good job at the time, working at McDonnell Douglas, but I was working from midnight to 7 in the morning, so I was free during the day. Richard Daley at the time was a student, I believe, at Washington University or St. Louis University. I can't even remember which now. So we were free, and we were willing to carry this exercise out. And so sure enough, on D-Day, we walked right on past at lunchtime. The workers were sitting up with their lunch buckets open around the area, but farther enough away where they were not paying attention to us. And Daley and I walked right on past them, climbed the arch. The arch was at a 300-foot mark at this point. We decided to climb about half that distance. However, we decided to stop at about 125 foot mark. Now, the rationale was that the men was working at the 300-foot mark. We felt as if we were any closer, and in the event of an accident, they would have tried to claim as if that we were responsible. So we decided to be a farther enough distance away from them. So in the event of an accident, it would have been hard for them to try to claim as if that our protest interfered with them to the extent that there were life lost. So that was the rationale. So my whole point is that all of this was worked out in terms of, it was calculated. It was not by accident. Many people think that protest demonstrations are just something that is done out of osmosis or some sort of emotional undertaking. But this was all planned and executed. So we decided to remain there. Well, at the time that the police come up, and they had a little elevator going up to the point also, they were trying to talk us down, and we told them that we would not leave until they hire 1,000 blacks within the whole entire construction industry, even though we knew that we were going to come down after so many hours because I had to go to work or whatnot, you know. But, and then, of course, after about 5 hours up there, sure enough, I came down, and Dale and I came down, and then show you another level of racism. The moment that I come down and my feet hit the ground, I was immediately arrested. Dale remained standing until they decided to arrest him, and then he went limp. That's a thing where during our civil disobedience, we refused to go to jail. As far as we were concerned, we felt as if the laws that we violated were far less of a crime than the builders of the arch. And if anyone should be going to jail, it should be the builders of the arch for practicing racial discrimination, robbing black folks of decent paying jobs, etc. Shall I go on? Do I still have it?
Well, we can move on to
Well, let me tell you about the arrest. And then
please do.
Okay. Well, we were arrested, of course, and for general peace disturbance and all kinds of other, about 3 or 4 charges. And of course, shortly, I had to be bonded out. After the arrest, they took us to jail. I was bonded out so I could get home and shower and get to work on time. But little did I know that 30 days after that I would be employed. I had no idea that McDonald would terminate me for what I was doing on my own time and not interfering with my work. But the charges were dropped. Nicholas Kassenbach, who was the Attorney General under the Kennedy administration, they learned about the Arch because this was a national event. You know, it grabbed the news nationally, and then I understand that they called the National Park Service here. The superintendent now, at that time, was Leroy Brown. He was an older gentleman than the superintendent that we have here now. That protest might have been the reason for that, you know, to have younger persons in the jobs. But anyway, moving on. They dropped the charges, and of course, 30 days after that, I was working at McDonnell Douglas at the time doing research and development under the space program. And 30 days afterwards, all of a sudden, McDonnell Douglas found it convenient for me to be terminated, and I was probably at that time was the only black research and development technician in the area of electronics. But I was terminated on my birthday, August the 28th, 1964. I was 29 at the time. And then, of course, this was in 1964 now. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was in the process of coming into being. And then, of course, when it came into being in 1964, the employment portion of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was not the employment portion was not ratified until a year later. And then, of course, I was unemployed from the time that I was terminated. But then McDonnell Douglas was still running ads in the job that I had held for 7 years before I became a research and development technician. So when the 1964 Civil Rights Act employment section kicked in '65, I go back to McDonnell and make an application for the job that I had held for 7 years. Of course, they refused me because by that time they looked upon me as a protester, you know, a civil rights agitator. They refused to hire me. And then, of course, I filed a complaint with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and that led to the Green versus McDonnell case. That is a Supreme Court case that made it possible to prove racial discrimination. Prior to my particular case, the only way you could prove racial discrimination is if the person who discriminated against the black would admit that they had discriminated against the black person. But my case made it possible to prove racial discrimination throughout the whole entire country by circumstantial evidence, as a short way of putting it.
Thank you, Percy. And I do want to talk about how the laws have changed that have made it more difficult now in the state of Missouri to prove workplace discrimination. Lynne, let's bring you in here now because I learned that you met with the Taney family. And the Taney family, they are descendants of Chief Justice who actually read the Dred Scott decision. How in the world did that come about, and what was that like?
This to me is probably one of the highlights of all the work that I've done since 2006. Because when I did this, I wanted to not only commemorate and obviously share Dred Scott's story and get a statue. You know, those were my, I thought it was going to be out of here in 3 years. But here we are.
And can you all hear Lynn just fine? Yes?
No.
Okay.
Yes? No? Okay. And here we are 18 years later. But one of my goals was to find descendants of other famous people in history, especially those related to the civil rights and Dred Scott. I wanted to meet the Tawney family, and I had this crazy idea that maybe one day I could meet them, and it might take a year or two, and I'd talk them into, talk to me, let's figure this thing out, let's work together, let's try to do something on the level of reconciliation. And I never found them. And then one day I got an email, and the email said, my name is Kate, and it's Tawney, Kate Tawney Billingsley. And I have written a play about my ancestor and Dred Scott's ancestors, but the play is about their descendants meeting over coffee today in modern times, discussing the Dred Scott case. I wonder if there's anyone out there who I can invite to New York to come and see my play. I thought I just had died and gone to heaven. I couldn't believe it. And so, of course, the person was me, and I went to New York. But, it was, I had an air of anticipation. There was excitement, but I think mostly because they contacted me. And that whole thing about waiting for 2 years to try to get them to get on my side, that wasn't even going to be necessary. So I went to New York, and I met Kate, and I met her father. She picked me up at the airport, and we went and had pizza or something with her dad. And they were absolutely very kind and very warm. And it was like, okay, I never did say or think, is this a setup or anything? But I was on guard just a little bit because, this was unusual. And yet we talked for a bit, and that play that she invited me to was going to run for 2 nights. And the day I got there, the day that they picked me up, was the first night. So, there was just enough time to go to the hotel, get dressed, and, go over. And I think I took a cab, and I met them at the actor studio in New York, the famous actor studio, because the daughter, Kate, is an actress. And so there we were. Now, the intention was for them to have a play and then have a talkback session. The talkback session would include me and her father and the producer. But I said, I don't think I want to do the talkback the first night. And I held back on that because I hadn't seen the play. And I thought, well, I can't sit out there and talk about something I don't even know what it's going to be. I said, but let's see how it goes, and, maybe I'll do it the second night. But the first night, I and everyone in that little theater, which, by the way, is about half the size of this room. It's a very famous place where Marlon Brando and Marilyn Monroe, all those people came through there. But it's a very, very tiny place. And so I was waiting and watching and looking at the audience that came. The audience was very eclectic. There were, black men with long dreads. There were people from other countries. I mean, the audience was just amazing. And yet they felt very confident. Well, as the play progressed, it was just a 2-man play. The characters spoke because they were saying what Kate felt in her heart. And the reason she wrote this play is really cute. She said, as I grew up, we have our ancestors' picture on the wall, but every Thanksgiving, they would all get together in her mom and dad's house, I guess. And Dad had like 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. So it was a huge gathering. And every year they would say, well, guys, I was thinking, do you think we should apologize for Dred Scott? Well, yeah, some of them thought they should, some of them thought they shouldn't. And this went on year after year after year. So Kate said, I've had it. I'm just going to write this play, and I'm going to tell you what I think. So she put those words into the mouths of the 2 characters. And for her to be about 30 or 31 years old at the time, it was powerful. And everybody in that studio, as I described to you, this eclectic audience, was just blown away. So that's how we met. And the second night, I did the talk back with them. But we also spent time together. And I think this is where our program title comes in, Recognition Before Reconciliation. It was a wonderful visit, a wonderful trip. The play was great both nights. But it was like, well, who are we to each other? And what does this history mean to us? So without going to it too much, Charlie and I went to the New York Museum, and we walked around and we had lunch and we talked, and we just had our conversation. But honestly, truly, that play really said it all. It really did. It said what the Dred Scott person would have felt, and it said what the Tawny person would have felt as he was trying to maybe apologize. He wasn't even sure. He was very awkward. He wasn't even sure if he should apologize or how he should apologize. He even brought a little gift, and the Dred Scott descendant was like, oh, dude, come on, I don't know, And so there was this back and forth. Now, the play is out there, but I think she's rewritten it to extend it. I shouldn't say rewritten, but extended it. So we have actually traveled with that play on a few occasions. And now, because of the relationship that we have built, which I tell people it is about relationship, ultimately that Charlie and I especially have traveled a lot and told our story. And here's how we can tell this story. Because they don't hide, they don't cover, they don't shy away, they don't lie, they don't make excuses, they put it out there. And when we go to speak, like we have been to Virginia several times, but this one day trip we had was amazing, and we went into the house of the legislative house in Virginia, and every room and every senator's chambers that we went into, Charlie took out his piece of paper, even though he had it memorized, and he read those words that the justice said, that blacks had no rights, that whites were bound to respect, etc. And he will say that, and he makes it a point as a descendant to personally read those words and tell people how wrong it was and how terrible that time must have been, and that, they're there today to say, this was wrong, and we're here to let you know that we don't buy that, and we're willing to work with whoever is willing to accept our apology, which we had done. And they did do an apology. The apology was actually on the 160th anniversary of the Dred Scott decision. It was in Annapolis, Maryland, and it was in front of the Tawny statue, which 3 weeks later was hauled away. Mm-hmm. So we have that picture, and the timing just couldn't have been more perfect because there was a big media splash, and it was literally in 200-plus newspapers and across seas as well. But Tawny looked around afterwards, and he said, that old guy, if he was here now, he'd hit me in the head and say, what the heck are you doing? And so he said, but I'm doing the right thing. So that acknowledgement, that recognition came before recognition in the play. It came in our conversation. And then the fun part of it is, God has a sense of humor. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation was about to embark on a strategic plan. This was back in 2016-17. And Charlie offered to do something to help us. It just turns out that he was a strategic writer for nonprofits. And so he offered to do that, and he did it. He came to St. Louis on the last session and met with the board, and we actually had our last final piece. He's very good. I would recommend him if you need a strategic planner, because in 3 sessions he worked us through what we needed to do. But that was his gift and one of his ways of being a part of today.
And I do want everybody on the panel to talk about what recognition before reconciliation means to you. But I want to know about this white blouse. What you wanted to say? Go ahead. Go ahead and crowd that mic for me.
I didn't talk about my experiences inside the school for 40 years. And most of the others of the 9 didn't talk about their experiences for 30 years. There's one among us who refuses to talk about it at all, refuses, because when you first start doing that, it is very painful. It is a walk through pain. But what prompted me to finally start doing that in 97, 98 was I was living in Little Rock, and I started hearing people revising history, and I couldn't tolerate that. So that's why I have struggled all those years to reach a point where I can tell my truth. I've developed a mantra that says that we can only have true racial reconciliation if we honestly acknowledge our painful but shared past. We can't have it without that.
That famous, I say famous, I hate to describe it that way, that impactful black and white photo of you with your glasses on, walking into the school for the first time. You are surrounded by an angry mob, and these are all adults. And you, as I mentioned, have this gorgeous white short sleeve blouse on and matching skirt. You said to me before we started that people have interpreted that photo a lot of different ways.
People think that I felt strong, when actually,
What did you feel?
I was frightened. I thought that the soldiers were there to protect all students. I had seen them break ranks to admit white students onto the school grounds. They were all around the perimeter of the school, and Central is 2 blocks wide and 2 blocks deep, so it's a very, very big place. When I approached the soldiers, they closed the ranks to bar me. Now, I walked further down the street to where I saw another sidewalk leading to the school, and this time the soldiers crossed rifles to bar me. And I thought that I probably should go in the main entrance, which would be in the center of that 2-block area. And when I got to the center, this time the soldier directed me across the street where those angry protesters were. I hadn't been afraid of the protesters before because I thought that the soldiers were there to protect all students. But they were there to keep us out. So when he turned me away, the protesters swarmed in, and they were directly behind me. And I didn't want to pass through them to go back in the direction I had come from, but that area was very familiar to me. And I knew that there was another bus stop at the far end of the street. While I was walking, and these people were threatening me and yelling at me and saying all kinds of hateful things, there were reporters and photographers in front of me walking backwards, and that's how they got the mob scene picture. There were a lot of reporters and photographers there because the desegregation of Central High School was a major test of Brown II, the Brown decision that said that desegregation should proceed with all deliberate speed. Central is significant not because it wasn't the first school in Arkansas to voluntarily desegregate. 5 small town school districts had voluntarily desegregated in 1955 because these districts had to pay to transport their Negro students to larger towns where there were high schools for them. So for economic reasons, they desegregated. But as I was walking, I heard a man say, "Let's hang her. Get a rope, drag her over to the tree." Of course, I was terrified. I had those dark glasses on because I have photosensitivity. Bright sun blinds me. So I had those sunglasses on so that I could see. But I kept walking. I just fastened on the idea of getting to the next bus stop. I saw getting there as safety. It's stupid to that doesn't make sense, but that's what allowed me to keep walking, just fastened on that idea. And when I got to the bus stop where there was a bench, there were 2 white middle-aged education reporters there. They tried to comfort me. They said, "Don't let them see you cry." And when one man put his arm across my shoulder to comfort me, the crowd rose in fury that this white man was trying to comfort me. And they started making anti-Semitic remarks toward him. And then I heard a white woman confronting the crowd, saying that they should be ashamed of the way they were treating a child. And when she said she wanted her little girl to go to school with Negro boys and girls, they turned their fury on her. She came and sat beside me, and it seemed that we had to wait a long time for the bus. It seemed like an extremely long wait, to the point where I got up and walked across the street where there was a drugstore intending to call a cab, and they locked the door before I could get inside, so I had to go back and sit and wait and wait. And while I was waiting, a Negro man walked up to me. I recognized him. He was publisher of a weekly newspaper, and he was married to the president of the NAACP. I recognized him, but I didn't know him. When he asked me to leave with him and showed me that he was armed, I didn't leave with him. Bertie Eckford's children did not walk away with a stranger. No, don't know. And later, one of the boys that I had gone to school with came to me. He was turned away by the soldiers, but the crowd didn't pay any attention to him. They fastened their attention on me. My sister and I, when we went to Dunbar, sometimes had walked home from school, and Dunbar is a bit further away from us than Central is. So I knew how to walk home from school, but I waited for that bus because I thought I would be safer on the bus than out there on the street walking alone. And I knew that Terrence Roberts, who asked me to leave with him, that he lived within 5 blocks of Central High, and I would have a long way to go by myself out there with fewer witnesses as to what would happen to me. And so I continued to wait till the bus came. And the woman got on the bus with me. Her name was Lee Lorch. Her husband worked at a Negro college, and that was not unusual even in times of segregation, because there had been white college teachers and teachers of our first schools right after Reconstruction. And she also was a member of the NAACP. But I had not had any contact with the NAACP. Little Rock 9 is, we're what was left after other people had dropped out, after the superintendent said that those selected could not participate in any extracurricular activities. It didn't make a difference to me, because Queen of those kids were not going to be in any after-school activities in the evening or at night in the first place. So that would not have been an option no matter what school I went to.
You told me that someone took that photo and the representation that they made of that photo, you as a warrior, is more in tune.
Yes, what people used to stick that picture in front of me and ask me to sign it, and I would put a Kleenex over it, because it was very upsetting to see that picture over and over and over. It no longer is, but I never felt that this was a picture of me being empowered. All I remember is the terror. But an artist has taken that image, including the people behind me who were screaming at me, and put me in the dress of the female guards from Black Panther movie. And in one hand, I have a staff, and I feel empowered in that image, not in the original one.
Do you feel more empowered now that you have been telling the story?
It's been a long time, but I'm as you see me now, because when I was first asked to speak to a group of students, I said no. I was not accustomed to public speaking. And the person who asked me was very, very persistent, extremely persistent. But I kept saying no. And he had 100 of his students write me letters. I couldn't say no anymore. And I have spoken to groups who have come to Little Rock on their civil rights tour for 26 years now. And it's because when I would break down and cry in talking about the past, they were patient with me, they were interested in the subject, and I feel like they actually allowed me to become stronger. And that's why I look forward to, when they come to Little Rock, look forward to being with them.
But do not go to her house.
Please, Lord.
Please do not. People actually go to her house and knock on her door and find her address and her phone number.
Yeah.
Please don't do that. We know this is being recorded, so the message will be heard by many, many others. Please do not go to Elizabeth's house in Little Rock, Arkansas. Percy, when I first moved to St. Louis and started working at KMOX Radio 28 years ago, it was shortly thereafter that I came to know your name and your story. And for me, you were this imposing civil rights figure. To me, you were among many voices and many people who shaped the landscape here in St. Louis. Now, however, in 2023, as the laws have changed, it is now harder in the state of Missouri to prove employment discrimination. It must now be not the primary factor. It must be the primary factor, not just a contributing factor. And I could be getting that wrong. I do apologize. But it is harder now in the state of Missouri to prove employment discrimination. Do you feel now that things are swept under the rug? Do you feel that you haven't been forgotten at all, but do you feel that we are not as understanding as we should be, or not as hungry for awareness and understanding as we should be?
Well, yes and no, and then something, and some things in between. Let me respond in this manner. The reason why that it's hard to prove racial discrimination now legally is not so much because people are not filing complaints of racial discrimination. Excuse me. Racial discrimination and racism is still alive. I explain why in a few minutes. But it's because of Anthony Scalia, the former Supreme Court judge. He watered down the Green versus McDonald case in terms of how you can prove racial discrimination. They set the bar much higher. And so as a result now, many good cases that should be found in behalf of the plaintiff is not found. And I understand from some experts that I chatted with at University of Columbus that it's only the rate now of proof of discrimination is down to about 16%. So that's discouraging. So many people just don't file the complaint as often as they once did because there was a remedy. But you see, again, racism is a business proposition. And it's going to continue until we take the profit or the benefits out of racism. It's a good case in point. For all practical purposes or whatnot, many whites have seen racial discrimination, but if they were the beneficiary of it, if that meant that their kids would get the job paying much more money than a black person, are they likely to say anything about it? No. So we have to look in terms of what can we do in order to make racism not an asset, but a liability. And that's where I came in at during the time in terms of civil disobedience. See, if you make the practice of racism a liability where the people that are practicing it, or the company that is allowing it to take place because they're profiting as a result of it, then they will be less likely to allow for it to continue to, because it's costing them money. So we have to take the profit out of racism. And that's how you disrupt. If you find it, you have to put the spotlight on it. See, racism is just like a bunch of cockroaches. When you put the light on it, I mean, they'll try to run for cover or whatnot, you know. But those that are about the business of wanting to be about fair play, like you take, for instance, some of the people that claim to be so righteous and are talking about competition and all of the other, but when it comes down to racism, they no longer see how important competition is. They want to eliminate competition by exercising racism. You know, I mean, just look at the sports. Look how many blacks could have been in the Hall of Fame and all of this other in terms of the sports. In terms of sports. Now, you're just now discovering black folks can play basketball, baseball, and things of that nature. When black folks had the human qualities to do whatever whites were doing back in the day, except that blacks was excluded. You see? When we get into this recognition before reconciliation, there are two avenues. We have to look at it from the standpoint of the person who was profiting as a result of it, and seeing whether or not there is any, what is the term, recognition, and before reconciliation. And then you have to look at the person who was at the short end of the stick in terms of this race. And you'll see that you have two different avenues. This is where your reparations comes in at. Now, if a person recognized that it was inhumane and it was wrong morally, religiously, and any of these other things that we want to live by to be humane, then you see the importance of reparations. But you'll find the average white person nowadays, you start talking about reparation, they say, hey, I didn't have anything to do with that racism, but they were the beneficiary of racism. But the first thing they say, no, you know. But just think about that. And this sometimes you have to ask yourself, as a white person, would you be on the side of advocating, trying to right the wrongs that she was the beneficiary of, as in terms of racism?
Are we naive, Percy, when we think that this is a moral issue, and if it is a moral issue, then you are appealing to the morality of the individual, to the character of the individual,
yes.
And that is not to say that you benefit, and so you're not going to say anything because you benefit. We appeal instead to the morality of individuals and to even to the faith of individuals.
To the faith or to the consciousness.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, that's what But what I'm saying is that yes, that we have to recognize. You have to recognize that is a factual. Of course, I mean, now the reason why I learned many of these arguments from the whites that I had in my organization. See, Action and CORE both was an interracial organization, and we used to have these brain stretching exercises. That's why I'm pretty much conscious about some of the thinking and the mentality and whatnot, you know. But the thing about it is, just think about it. all of these institutions, the white power structure, you know, is what we used to refer to it at. All of your chief executive officers of your businesses and of your institution of higher learning, you know, all of them are pretty much makes up the white power structure. These are the people that primarily are responsible for the quality of politicians that we have, because they're the one that primarily funds them. Mm. So, I mean, this is something that we have to, we rally the consciousness in terms of protest. Those of us that have another kind of consciousness in trying to shock people into thinking. Because as long as people breaking in the gravy, they don't have no time to be thinking about sharing it. There's another factor sets in, and that is greed. Just don't get enough of it. And then when you start talking about sharing, well, they say, well, you must be out of your mind. You think I'm going to share all of this? Work for it. Not realizing, not taking in consideration that their foreparents probably are responsible. I would have worked for it had I had the opportunity to do so. Mm. But you rob me of it, and then you're going to turn right around and going to penalize me or look down upon me because I raised question. You know, that's what demonstration does. It shocks. It forces one to begin to start thinking outside of the box, as a way of putting it or whatnot, you know. And that's a natural thing. Now, don't think like I didn't invent it. Mother Nature brought it here at the time of childbirth. When that little infant comes here, whatnot, they then begin to communicate with you by raising hell.
Now, I never thought, as a mother, that my sons, when they wanted milk, that they were protesting. I never thought that, but now that I think about it.
Think about it.
Now that I think about it.
Think about it. Mother Nature brought protesting when something is not when something is not up to speed, is not up to snuff. Mother Nature wants you to raise hell. Now, and that baby crying or whatnot can drive you up the wall and you can't speak that. They can't speak to you and you can't speak to it. But you keep fumbling around until you do something to eventually to quieten little Fred.
What Percy is saying is we need to change the diaper of America. That's what Percy is saying.
Yeah.
America needs a diaper, a fresh diaper. Okay. Lynne, when we look at this panel, we have a representation of 100 years between Dred Scott and the desegregation of Little Rock, of Central High School, and the connections between and the civil rights work that happened in St. Louis. We often don't think of ourselves in St. Louis as having done things that were on a national stage that had international, you think of Ferguson, that had international attention and awareness. But Dred and Harriet Scott, there were 300 freedom suits that were filed at the old courthouse. The only one we really talk about is Dred and Harriet Scott. Why was it important for you to then begin to really tell that story of Dred and Harriet Scott?
Well, for the very reason that you said. First of all, there were over 300 enslaved people who filed for their freedom at the old courthouse here in St. Louis. However, that wasn't even known until like 2003.
Right.
Because the records were in the circuit court building in the basement and hidden away. So they were anonymous, as it were. And yet those were real people who had real plights and real courage and real situations, and most of them did not win their freedom suits. So Dred and Harriet are like icons, and for the fact that I like to tell people, okay, so yeah, well, they sued, and so did the other people. And other people in other states, a few here and there, however it was allowed, were able to do the same. But Their case was important because it took 6 years to get to the Missouri Supreme Court. And the Missouri Supreme Court went against precedents and said that times are not now as they once were when we used to judge these cases. And we're going to get back on letting all these slaves go free. Things are changing. The wind is shifting. And so they said no. And after 6 years, when the Scotts had the opportunity to continue their case, that would have probably been a deal breaker for most people. Mm-hmm. You're in a situation where you've done this for 6 years. The children of the prior owner, who really were not slave owners at all, in fact, if anything, they were closer to being not the strict sense of the word abolitionist, but more like that. They helped them profusely. And after 6 years, how much more can you do? But they also persisted. And so, to me, the break point was Roswell Field, hey, we can do this on the federal level. Are you in? Can you handle it? Do you want to? And Dred jumped in with both feet. And I've recently found the pamphlet that describes what they actually did to fight John Sanford for the first term, 54, it was 54. And it's a blow-by-blow account of how they just kept saying, hey, no, the judge was wrong, the jury instructions were wrong. You said you didn't do this, but you did, and you even admitted it over here. And it's really wonderful to look at how the text reads in this pamphlet, which Dred himself also had written. Really, it's a little longer than a page of his own personal appeal for an attorney in Washington, D.C. And he says, is there anyone there that will do for me what I cannot do for myself and help me and take my case? So I think all of these little pieces, when you look at the 11 years, most people would have said, nah, we get to be under the jurisdiction of the sheriff because Mrs. Emerson's moved away, and so we don't have to deal with her. And John really lives in New York, John Sanford, so maybe we can just handle it like this. No, they wanted their daughters free. They didn't want them sold from them. They wanted their freedom. They already had their freedom. They actually were being denied their freedom because the once free, always free was something that was the law that the Missouri Supreme Court did not uphold. And unfortunately, it took another 6 years almost. It was just under 11 years for them to go through that whole proceeding just to find out, as Carol said at the beginning, that they were told that they nor any other person of African descent would ever be citizens. In fact, those of us sitting here today who are, Judge Tawney said, would never be citizens. So the outcome of that case, as well as the amendments that came from it and the war that broke the back of slavery, all of these were derivatives of the Dred Scott decision. And most people say to me, oh, yeah, Dred Scott, let's see. Oh, I know that name. Was he that guy that? And they're always so way off the wall. Mm. And so it's like, no, let's get it straight, So to me, it's that linchpin in our history. It's like before Dred Scott and after Dred Scott. Mm-hmm. It's that point.
We are going to take some questions, if you have them, in a few minutes, because I know, Percy, I don't want you to lose your train of thought, but I do have one more question for Elizabeth. Percy, okay. Can you make it quick?
Oh, you want me?
Yeah, you were raising your hand to say something.
Yeah, I want to say, just think about that for a moment. Why is it that black folks are hated so? Black folks hadn't created no problems for white folks. Black folks was brought here and then treated inhumanely, and yet you hear white folks say, well, we're scared of black folks. Why should white folks be scared of, black folks should be scared of white folks. White folks is one, for all practical purposes, had all of the power. And executing that this unjust power upon black folk. I mean, the question needs to be asked: why are black folks hated so here in America, when we was the one that was brought here as slaves and then been discriminated against and everything? Why are black folks treated the way black folks are treated by whites? What have we done to, what have we as a people done to white folk to justify that type of treatment?
There is a part of me that raising children, you parent in a variety of ways and over a variety of situations. And there's a part of me that at one point I had to say to my sons, I know what is happening to you, but what you must now do is determine how you will react to that. And what you've raised, Percy, and speaking in generalities, all black people aren't hated and all white people don't hate all black people.
No, because that's why I love John Brown and whatnot, I mean.
Just generally, yeah. But what you've said does lead me to the question I was going to ask Elizabeth and Percy and Lynne as well, and that is, given what you endured, Elizabeth, and you did not speak of it for 40 years, and you mentioned one of the Little Rock Nine has never spoken of it. A, how did you manage to stay emotionally stable through it, and how did you manage to not be bitter?
Well, I lived away from Arkansas for a very long time, and the subject of my high school experiences wasn't revealed. I often tell people that photograph is famous, but the individuals in it are not famous. I've had an ordinary life. When I was in the military, somebody in my office saw a mention of me in a New Yorker magazine, and I just said, take the magazine out of circulation, so that other people won't be asking me about it. I actually have had to deal with it more being in Arkansas than before. Before I could try to ignore it, and I've noticed that when I talk about it, I try to talk about it in a way that I'm teaching and not talking about feelings. But when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, there's some things that come up unexpectedly. It's a matter of re-experiencing trauma. You try to avoid it, but you cannot avoid it. But with therapy, you can arrive at a point where you have a better life. PTSD is something that you have to address through psychotherapy. And if anybody here has endured long-term trauma, I urge you to seek mental health help, because it doesn't go away. It really doesn't go away. When
did you decide, and what made you decide?
I wasn't diagnosed until 1980, and I joined the Army in 1967. Had I known that I had this continuing problem, I would not have been able to join the military.
Did the military exacerbate it?
There was a racial disturbance at Fort McClellan in 1971, where it was blacks attacking whites. And it was a time when this was in reaction to the harassment that they were experiencing when people were harassing them because of Afro hairstyles and wearing dashikis and expression of black pride. But that was handled the way those kinds of things are usually handled. Many of those people were dispersed and fragmented, and discharged from the military.
And it was after that you decided, I need therapy.
No, it was many
years later. That was in 1970.
That's
so
about 71. And I wasn't diagnosed till 1980. I've had therapy off and on through the years. Sometimes I have given up and quit, and other times I've gone back. But there have been advances in psychopharmacology where medication that I have now is more effective than what I had before. But I do honestly urge you to seek help if you have experienced long-term trauma.
I, for one, have never heard you connect the trauma of that time, being a member of Little Rock Nine, to PTSD. And I didn't write that question down, but before we started, there was a noise and you jumped.
Oh, I can't help but flinch when there's loud noises. But it only happens for a second and it's over with.
Right.
So I've learned that there's some things that I just can't avoid. I'm very proud of the progress that I have made in achieving some better health, but there's some things that I still have to work on.
I just don't think that as black people, white people, Jewish people, Asians, but we're talking about black people right now, that we talk enough. We're talking now about trauma-informed education. We're talking now, trauma is just a new part of our lexicon, but we never related the trauma that you had to feel then. We never called it trauma.
Well, we didn't talk about the things that happened to us in school, and that was torture. Frankly, that was torture, because we were knocked about every day from beginning to end. And prior to going to Central High School, I had never seen violence being tolerated in school. And one of the reasons that I talk to students is that I want everybody to understand that people say that they weren't involved, they didn't do anything. Not doing something is a decision. I simply ask people to not be afraid of the people who are different from them, to try to reach out and support someone that they see who's being harassed. Because I can tell you from my own experience that if you reach out and simply treat people the way you want to be treated, it could be an important difference to that person that day. And there were, as a shy kid, I look forward to going to my speech class, the very last class of the day, because there were 2 students in that class who engaged me in ordinary conversation, and that was the only class where nobody ever used racial slurs. And it was, I didn't find out till talking to them 36 years later that they told me that the teacher had told the class before I came into the class the kind of behavior that she would not tolerate and what her expectations were. And so that made a difference in that class.
Percy, how have you managed to not, or have you managed to not be...
Now go off the rails. After 50-some-odd years in the movement.
I was just going to say bitter, but...
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I have to even ask myself sometime about that. A lot of people ask me that question. That's a very, very good question. The only reason why I think I haven't gone off the rails, and then there's no reason. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, what slavery could have been about? That's enough. When you are treated, you're treated less than a human, even though the human being probably, the definition probably wasn't even defined properly to a slave. But can you imagine of a human being or yourself where you have no controls? You have no controls over your kids. Someone could come in and take your kids and sell them, or they could rape them. I mean, your wife is raped or whatnot. There's nothing you can do. You have absolutely no say-so if you was a male, or to say the least, or being a female. I mean, just think about what that, and then of course, over a period of time, someone decided to say that you are free, but you don't have no way of taking care of yourself. You have to go back to the slave owner and beg him to allow you to stay there and still be treated pretty much the same, just to survive. Now, why would that not help? Why would that not affect a person's psyche? Just think about that. And then turn right around and people say that you are something that that you need to get qualified to. You need to become a human being. Gonna blame the victim. Now something's wrong with that decision making. There's nothing wrong with us. That has not been perpetrated upon us. But you just think about the inhumane conditions that we as a people had to undergo here in this country, the land of the free. The most prosperous country in the world, on whose back? How many other countries had the type of slavery that we had here in this country?
I don't think you answered my question, Percy. Or did you? Are you saying, let me say this, are you saying?
I'm saying that.
Just imagine it's not.
Yeah, well, but here's, no, I don't want to imagine this.
No, I mean, are you just saying that?
No, I'm only saying that I have been able to, since being in the movement, I've been able to see a certain amount of some progress in the struggle. In other words, people that are becoming involved in the struggle.
Are you hopeful today?
Yeah, I'm still.
You're hopeful today?
I'm still hopeful, yes. Yes. I'm not sure whether or not progress is going to come fast enough to overcome the people that have given up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I said, I'm not sure that the progress is going to come fast enough to overcome the number of people that have given up. And that, of course, I mean, would be bad news. I would like to think that if we can continue to agitate nonviolently and get the attention of folks to the extent of them becoming involved at a pace whereby we can resolve the hostility, I think that we have a chance.
We want to take some questions, and as you are they going to be on a microphone? Are they coming to, or writing, or asking, or standing? I'll let somebody handle that, and as we get that together, Ryan is going to handle that for us. If you do have questions, see Ryan is walking, he's the one. Lynne, even though you are the great-great-granddaughter of Dred and Harriet Scott, you know, even in your life you have dealt with discrimination. How have you handled that?
Well, you know, I have sitting here thinking about several stories I could tell you, but I guess I'll just share this one because it's kind of like a real important one in my life. When I went to college, I went to SIU Edwardsville. I graduated in business administration and marketing. I got married the day after I graduated, but that was planned. The graduation wasn't planned to be the day before, but our date was set a year ahead of time. So, you know, it was a fast-moving time, and so obviously your next move is go get a job, right? So just to make it quick, I did get interviews at this one location, which is a St. Louis corporation, which I will not name. And I had 3 interviews, and at the end of it all, went really well. The lady said, well, I believe we're going to be offering you this job, so hopefully you'll accept it, and we're going to send a letter to you. You should be getting it in about a week. So essentially, she told me I had the job, but in a week, the letter didn't come. And in another week and in a month, the letter didn't come. And I probably called maybe once or twice, and that wasn't productive. However, at some point, you just figure, okay, But I finally got a letter. And I got a letter, and it was really just about one sentence, two at the most. And it just said, you know, we're very sorry we're not able to offer you a position at this time. And it was like, oh, my, I'm waiting because this is what it's supposed to be. Didn't happen. So I moved on. But as fate would have it, I have always had a wonderful relationship with my whole family, and especially our grandmother, Grace Madison, who married Dred Scott's grandson. So she's the mother of all the descendants. And Grandmother Grace would sit in her chair, and I find myself sitting just like this. This is how she sat. This is where her arms were, so genes do matter. And she would just go on and share stories with me and tell me things. I literally was sitting at her feet. And on this particular day, she said to me, well, honey, you know, I have a friend, and she works at that company. She told me, I'm telling you, I just don't know about these people. She told me that there was a lady that was supposed to retire, but when she found out that a black girl was taking her job, she said, oh, heck no, and I'm not going nowhere. And the woman would not retire. As it turns out, that was me. And that was the company, and that was what happened. And I was undone. And she said, child, don't tell your father. And my dad, you know, was Dr. John Madison. He had his law degree. He taught. He was the family representative. This would have made him, I'm sure, very angry. However, I at least understood what happened, okay? It wasn't the people that interviewed me. It wasn't the company. It was this lady. And apparently they couldn't make her. And I think they were trying to, honestly. From what I heard about her, she probably was not somebody they were happy she was going to retire, but she didn't. So that was a real eye-opener on the one hand, but I also felt that...
That made my case.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to share that story. Yeah. But I also want to be clear that I could have, you know, there are people with license plates out there. When they don't like something, they say certain things and they indicate who they're saying it to. And I saw some of those license plates about this particular corporation. But I did not take it personally in the sense that I really didn't know. So here's what, fast forward, you know, I'm now a manager. I hire and fire people left and right all the time throughout the years. And one time we hired someone, and we went to get signatures and whatever, and our boss said, oh, you can't hire that person. We said, why not? Why? We've already offered the position. Why? Oh, we have a hiring freeze. Oh, so the supervisors in the department, of which there were 3 and at one time 4, no one told us. And we hired people every 8 weeks, like clockwork. So this wasn't just a random hire. We were hiring people, and no one told us there was a hiring freeze. So being Dred Scott's great-granddaughter, I said, no way. I said, we're hiring this guy. I don't know about your freeze, and I don't know what your problem is, but you didn't tell us, and we are not going to call this man and tell him he doesn't have a job. Of course, we can't tell him why either, and now he's just going to think something horrible, like, what did he do wrong, or who are these people? That's how misconceptions go out, and that's how, you know, bad feelings go out. That's how wrong actions happen. I mean, most of the time it's like Percy's saying, but there are those times when things just happen, but you may never know. And had my grandmother never shared that story with me, among the hundreds that she shared, I would never know that that's why I didn't get that job. And to this day, it would probably bother me. But, you know, I just think at some point you just have to say, you know, that's over and move on. But, and then the last one I'll tell you, this wasn't a discrimination. This was just gender harassment, which I don't think they would have gotten away with today. But I worked for a Ford Motor Company for a few years. And one of my things I did, I worked for the employee relations manager, and I worked for the plant manager. When his secretary was out, I had to step in for her. And some men came in from the plant floor. I was sitting at her desk, and big burly guys, whoa, well, what do we have here? What are you here for, a beauty contest? And I didn't say this, but I should have said, no, actually, I'm the plant manager in training, and you are? That should have been my comeback, but, you know, on that day, I didn't have it, but that was the deal. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm here, but I know my work. No, I'm not here for some stupid foolishness, and that really ticked me off. But again, because I think that in order for you to move forward, you have to maintain yourself. It's funny when you ask Percy, you know, how did he maintain his cool all these years? And maybe Percy's thinking, well, I didn't always do that.
He didn't.
But I know, I was going to say, you know, but for the most part, you know, you have to, because it's you that has to get up and go back out there and do whatever it is you're going to do. So those are just a couple of stories there. But I think ultimately it's about knowing who you are. But having the truth does help, because otherwise you can really have some misconceptions that can really turn you in the wrong direction.
Elizabeth, before we take a couple of questions, what does recognition before reconciliation mean to you?
You know, at the 50th anniversary, I met the girl who's portrayed, who's behind me in that picture with her mouth twisted in hate. And she apologized. And at one point, I found out that she wasn't going to explain what she was apologizing for. We spent 2 years talking to students. She never talked about the past. She talked about her hopes for the future. And I kept saying that you don't have the right to have hopes for the future if you cannot acknowledge the past. Eventually, I stopped associating with her because I just couldn't tolerate it anymore.
She never did?
No. And she said she had amnesia about the past, but I found out that she remembered a lot of stuff. But she just didn't remember the stuff that she had done and that her friends had done. She didn't talk about that. She's a very, very loyal person, and I think she felt like if she were honest, she would have been betraying her friends.
Would you please thank our panelists, Lynne Jackson, Percy Green, and Elizabeth Eckford. And thank you all so much for coming. I do want to, as you stand, well, thank you very much, standing for them. They have changed this country. They have absolutely changed this country.
Well, I want to thank for being invited to whatnot.
You are welcome.
Hey,
You're welcome.
I mean, that's I was shocked.
We do. We do want you to know, and I know that many of you do, that the No Tears Project concerts are Friday and Saturday at Jazz St. Louis. They're absolutely free, but you do need to RSVP at jazzstl.org. That is jazzstl.org. And I will be first in line to get Elizabeth's book. She is going to sign copies, I am told, of her book, Worst First Day. So if you want to stick around and get a copy of her book, please, please do so, because we are looking at living history here on this panel. Thank you all so much, and thank you for coming, and thank you to those who planned this. Ryan, thank you. Thank you very much to the Gateway Arch Park Foundation. Thank you.
The executive producers are Oxford American, National Park Service, and Jazz St. Louis, with support from Jefferson National Parks Association, Stella Boyle Smith Trust, and Gateway Arch Park Foundation. Special thanks to our panelists, Elizabeth Eckford, Percy Green, and Lynne M. Jackson, and our moderator, Carol Daniel. Follow us on social media at Oxford American. Video production by Key Productions and Alumni Broadcasting Association.